Welcome back. This is part 3 of the inaugural episode of Celestial Thoughts. Well, we continue with our view of the various visitor types that will come. We reviewed the pick a fight with the Mormon Church types that tend to if they're members of the church, tend to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just leave the church. And which is, my advice is exactly the opposite. Stay in the church, serve, enjoy the people. They are marvelous people. There's no reason to leave the church. Now, if they kick you out, that's another thing. But just enjoy the church, enjoy the people, and serve where you can. The True Blue Mormons are another story. They are the ones who have been conditioned to follow the prophet, feel the spirits, all very emotional, and, well, you see the descriptions there. We've gone over them. The next category, and we'll talk more about True Blue Mormons in a minute, but the next category is a group whose eyes are beginning to open. They have begun to see a little bit and to take a look and say, oh man, you know, I just feel like something is amiss. Like there's just something not quite right. And I'm not sure what it is, but they've read a book. They've listened to some recordings. They've talked to friends. They are beginning to say, I've got questions like crazy. And every time I turn around, it leads me to some answer that the church just can't give me, or the church ridicules, or the church doesn't pay attention to, or they give me that kind of pat you on the head, go away kid to bother me kind of answer. And I'm tired of that. I want answers. I want the truth. And so they have many questions that they're beginning to get answered, and they get angry, and they find disappointment with the church, that this church that they have so much invested in isn't the church they thought it was. And there is a mourning period, if you will, that happens. You know, it's really exciting to see someone open their eyes in that way and begin to look and actually see what the restoration really consists of, who Joseph Smith really was, that he was just an absolutely wonderful man and did so much for us. But you go back to the True Blue Mormons, and they will get angry at those who come back with questions and say, well, wait a minute, what about this or what about that? You know, I'm a little bit disappointed that it appears that the church is X, Y, or Z, and they will say, oh, no, it's not that way at all, because they are conditioned to feel that anything you say that disrupts their comfort and safety and feeling of protection is wrong. And we've talked about that, how they equate the feeling with revelation. So that they, if you begin to ask some of these questions and take some of these lines of thinking, and they say, well, look, I'm getting a feeling in the pit of my stomach that this isn't true, and so therefore I really don't want to talk about this anymore because the Lord's telling me it's not true. And you say, well, no, it's not the Lord telling you it's not true. It's your conditioning responding. And we're going to talk about that in more detail in a few minutes. But, okay, so the True Blue Mormons are basically of a mind to say anything that disrupts my comfortable feelings, I don't like, and I equate that with the Lord telling me that what you're saying is not true. And that's a big problem with attempting to present factual information and logical argument to True Blue Mormons. They feel essentially that, look, we're all here in Zion. We're all gathered in Zion. Here we are. We've got our own bank and we've got our own department store, and we're all ready for the Lord to come. We're just waiting around for him to come. And we know that in fact, we're not waiting for him at all. He's waiting for us. But you see, they don't understand that. They don't understand that it is our duty as children of God to go up the hill, to go up the mountain and talk to him, converse with him, commune with him, and get his ideas about how we ought to live and what we ought to do next, the kinds of things we ought to be involved in. We don't need to follow a prophet to find those things out. And that's one of the things that happens when your eyes begin to open, is you realize you can ask the Lord and get his opinion about these things, and he'll tell you. He really will. Why do you think I'm doing this? It's not like I don't have other things to do. It's not like I don't have a business to run. I do. But the Lord's made it very clear that this is a task I can do. I have the ability to do it, and so here's your contribution. And I say, okay. And he has turned around and blessed me in ways that I won't rehearse to you because it's not important for purposes of this conversation, but financially in ways that make it possible for me to do this. And so I do. And that's one thing that happens as your eyes begin to open. You realize that rather than following a prophet, you follow the Savior. The Savior is who I serve. He is my God. He is my Savior, and I follow him. Well, okay. So those, we're going to get into all of this a little more later, but those with eyes beginning to open, I think are probably the majority of people who will come here, because this is a place they can get answers. Straight answers, honest answers. And I don't ask anybody to believe me about anything. I'm not starting anything. I don't ask anybody to follow me. Far from it. Follow the Savior. That's what I will tell you, and that's what I tell myself. Go to him and ask him if the things that I'm teaching you are true. Simple as that. I'm not afraid of you doing that. Not a bit. And I expect you to thank him, not me. I'm leaving the comments open for now. And I hope it doesn't get contentious. I hope we don't have pick-a-fight folks coming and picking a fight. If they do, I'll just shut it off. Got to quit wiggling my desk here. It wiggles the camera. In any case, eyes beginning to open is just a wonderful time. It's wonderful to see people opening their eyes and coming to Christ. Now, the next group is a group with their eyes fully open. They have realized that while the church is a wonderful organization and has oodles of opportunities to serve and is a great place to be, that as Nephi, as Moroni, as the Lord himself prophesied in the Book of Mormon, that book we are condemned regarding because we take it lightly. And what is it in there we take so lightly? Well, the church says those scriptures that talk about, and we're going to go through these in great detail later on, but the scriptures that talk about the Gentile church apostatizing and falling away and that sort of thing, those are the Lutherans and the Methodists and the Catholics and all those kind of folks. That's not us. And then you go and look at the scriptures where they say, this Gentile church we're talking about is going to have problems, prideful and all that. Yeah, they're the ones that have received the book. These things, it says. Well, the Lutherans and the Methodists and the Catholics and the Baptists haven't received these things. We are the ones who have received these things, and we are the ones who are taking it lightly and, in fact, rejecting much of the fullness of the gospel. So, when your eyes are really open and you understand the depth and the breadth of what's going on, how far away from the gospel we have trod, it is inspiring in a way, because now you know where to go. You hopefully, and with hope in the future, with hope in the Lord and meekness, prepare to be gathered by the Lord to Zion, because this becomes an individual effort. Oh, we can read together, we can study together, that's no problem. But this is very much an individual between you and the Lord kind of an effort. And when you are hopefully and meekly preparing to be gathered by the Lord to Zion, you gain a testimony of the work that is absolutely wonderful. And then you realize, as did the people in 4th Nephi, and without question, the other instances of Zion that have existed on the earth, that all are equal. That's why we don't stand when someone walks in a room, because we're all equal. There are no poor among us. Why? Because we are all equal. And we, if we have a little bit and someone else is lacking, we cannot stand to see them lack. And so we provide where we can. If it's a job, will there be jobs in Zion, or will people just discover things to do and go do them? I suspect that's probably the way it's going to be. But if someone is in need, if someone needs help, you won't take a step in another direction until you help. Because that's the way you are in Zion. No contentions and disputations. Are there going to be differences of opinion? Well, of course. Smart people do differ in their opinions. But when you get together, as did, for instance, the Founding Fathers, many of whom had distinctly different ideas about how a government ought to be formed, but got together, put down all the good points they had, and started looking at each other's positive points of view. And one says to the other, whoa, I really like that point you have there. That I didn't think of that. That's really good. And the other one looks at something on your list and says, yeah, and you know what? There's something over here I see that I didn't really take that into consideration. We put all this stuff together and we end up with something better than any of us could have done alone. That's consensus. There's no winners, there's no losers. We're all equal. And we all have an equal right to have an opinion about things. And when you take pride out of the equation, you can come together and you can find a better solution than any of us could have by ourselves and create a wonderful solution through consensus. That's what the Founding Fathers did. Okay. And you find people dealing justly one with another. When you deal justly one with another, you don't need mercy. If I will break my pocketbook, if I will use every ounce of time I have to make sure that what I've promised you, you get, that's justice. And you'll come back to me and you'll say, you didn't have to do that. And I'll say back to you, I know it didn't. But in order to make sure that I'm dealing justly with you, I did have to do it. And now that you're coming back, not only satisfied that I have completed my part of the deal, but you can see I've actually done more, then I have no worries. I don't need mercy. I don't need to have to say, I goofed this up and I didn't finish it on time and I hope you'll forgive me. I don't have to say any of that. That's what it is. Can you imagine a world where people dealt justly with each other? I hate to say it because I know people that are attorneys. They'd be out of business. Pretty much. A lot of people with locksmiths. Well, okay. These are the visitor types that I perceive will come here. And I expect a lot of eyes beginning to open, folks. I expect there to be some eyes fully open, folks, who come for just to see who this fellow is that's preaching this stuff. Probably they already know. Probably they could teach it better than I can. But I hope that we answer questions for those whose eyes are beginning to open, and I hope at times even a few true blue Mormons come and listen and have eyes that begin to open. All we are followers of Christ. He is who we serve. And I hope that maybe even a couple of pick a fight with the Mormon church types may come and find answers. Well, okay, we're going to continue now with the concept of this classical conditioning we've referred to for some time. And I'm going to we'll refer back to this list, so don't forget it. But I want to tell you something. I want to bring you up to speed a little bit on this conditioning business. We're finally getting to that in some detail here. Again, I wrote a blog post on my blog at celestialthoughts.com about this called Pavlov's Saints. And so I'm going to rehearse a couple of things in there, and I'm going to give you some new stuff. So if you've read it, this isn't going to be a repeat. But I want to go over a little bit of history. Pavlov, this fellow Ivan, not sure how you pronounce it in Russian, Pavlov, was a Russian physiologist. And he was doing research on the digestive systems of dogs. And so he had rigged up a tube in the mouth of the dogs. And when his assistant would bring in the food, the dogs would salivate and they would collect the saliva and measure the volume of the saliva. And that was the part of the experiments they were doing. Well, one day, Pavlov noticed that when the assistant came in the room without food, just to come in to do something, the dog salivated. Just his entering the room did it. That was Pavlov's eureka moment. And he said, oh my goodness, I think I've discovered something significant. And so he added something. When the food was actually brought to the dogs, he would ring a bell. And every time the food came in, he would ring that bell. And after a short period of time, these dogs were then conditioned such that if you rang the bell, they would salivate. Now, this is called classical conditioning. It's where you take a natural thing that happens, a natural occurrence, and you pair it with something artificial. So, for instance, a natural occurrence would be bringing in the food, and the dogs would normally, at the presence of food, salivate. Well, when you add a subconscious emotional stimulus, like the assistant coming in with the food, for instance, and the assistant just walks in the room with no food, the dogs salivate because they have been conditioned to that artificial stimulus, or the bell ringing, artificial stimulus. But they subconsciously have equated that artificial stimulus with food bringing, the natural occurrence of salivating when food is brought in. So ring the bell, you can get them to salivate anytime. Okay, so he went on with those and discovered all kinds of things and did all kinds of experiments. Another fellow by the name of Watson came on a little bit later and studied all of these things. And by now, a number of years had gone by, and so there was technology developed and theories and experiments and so on. One of those experiments was one you probably couldn't do today. A young baby, 8 or 9 months old, something like that, almost a toddler, was put in a room with some toys, and a rat, a laboratory rat, not one out of the junkyard, but a laboratory rat, white, beautiful rat, was put down in front of the boy, and he played with the rat, didn't have any problem with it. It was like a little, little pet kind of thing. And so the experimenters had some kind of an iron pipe rod thing, and they hit it with something else, and it would make a loud clang. And they began by putting the rat in front of the boy and then hitting these metal objects together and making this loud clang, and it would frighten the boy. And every time they put the rat in front of the boy, they would make this loud clang and they'd take the rat away. After a very short time, all they had to do was put the rat down in front of the boy, and he was scared to death of it, because he had been conditioned with that loud clang that when the rat came in, it would be frightening to him. And so the rat represented fright, subconsciously. He probably couldn't even tell you why. If he could talk, he couldn't even tell you why he was frightened. But that's classical conditioning. Now, operant conditioning gets into where you have a rat in a cage, and when he pushes a button or flips a switch, some food comes down, that sort of thing. That's a little more complicated, but it still accomplishes the same thing. You can get people to do things and think certain ways and have emotional reactions to things with this kind of conditioning. Okay, along comes, now this Watson fellow was a very interesting fellow. He studied these things and accomplished all kinds of experiments, and then he went to work for a large advertising agency, and within 2 years was a vice president. Made a lot of money because his advertising campaigns were based on this technology. Get people to equate certain emotional things with emotional reactions with a product. If you use this, you'll feel more beautiful. If you use this, you'll feel cleaner. You'll whatever. And he would go through these commercials and create these advertisements, both in print and on the radio and this and that. Anyway, his campaigns were wildly successful. And again, he went up the ladder and was a vice president in 2 years, and was very successful. Another fella came along about the same time, maybe a little later, not too many years later, by the name of Edward. And by the way, Watson, I think, was called the father of modern advertising. Edward Bernays was a nephew of Freud, although he came to the United States when he was a very young boy, 3, I think, and he didn't ever really know Freud. But he read all the work, and he read all these conditioning experiments and all that, and became really good at it. And he applied these things not just to advertising, but to public relations, where you didn't actually have to pay for anything, really. He was the guy that he became so successful at what he did that one of the large tobacco companies, now in those days, this is in the 1920s, women didn't smoke. They thought it was a filthy habit. Well, it is a filthy habit, but they just didn't smoke. And this tobacco company came to Edward Bernays and said, look, we could double our sales if you could get women to smoke. Any chance of that? Well, he developed a campaign. There were actually several, but the initial thrust was he put together a group of women that were going to march in, I believe it was the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade that year. And anyway, it was a big parade. And they marched down the street with signs that said things like liberty for women and so on and so forth. And they all were smoking cigarettes. The message of his campaign and of this group of women marching through the street in this parade was that if you were a woman, you could become liberated by smoking cigarettes. That this was a way that you could show your independence, your self-confidence, and that show men that you're a woman, yada, yada, all this kind of stuff. Well, it worked. It was wildly successful. I think he called it the Liberty Stick or the Liberty Torch or something like that was what he called cigarettes. And before long, with that and other advertising campaigns that he put together and so on and so forth, before long, women were smoking like crazy. And the tobacco companies were very happy. So these kinds of campaigns, these classical conditioning techniques are very, very powerful. Now, I want to show you something here. This is not an experiment that was actually done. An experiment, and I'll put a link down below to some of these. It's sort of dry and all that, but some scientists did an experiment, the results of which corroborate what I'm about to show you. They never did an experiment exactly like I'm going to show you. But this is corroborated by their findings that this would in fact happen. Now let me show this to you really quick, and we'll go through it, and then I'll relate it. I think you'll probably see how it relates. Okay, here's the story. A group of scientists placed, and again, this is fictional, but you'll get the point. It's a way to demonstrate. Anyway, a group of scientists placed 5 monkeys in a cage, and in the middle, a ladder with bananas on top. Every time one of the monkeys went up the ladder, the scientists soaked the rest of the monkeys with very cold water. Very uncomfortable. Monkeys didn't like that at all. Well, after a while, every time a monkey went toward the ladder, the other monkeys beat him up, physically kept him from climbing up the ladder. Now, after a while of this happening to each of the monkeys, no monkey dared go up the ladder, regardless of the wonderful bananas that were at the top. They were all conditioned that they would get beat up if they went up the ladder. Now, the scientists removed one of those monkeys who had been doused with water and all that and replaced it with a new monkey. Well, he sees the first thing this new monkey did was go up the ladder because he sees the bananas up there and doesn't know why these other monkeys aren't going up there. Immediately, the other monkeys ganged up on him and beat him up and kept him from going up there. After several attempts and beatings, the new monkey, learned to stay away from the ladder, even though he didn't know why. He'd never been doused with water. He just knew that everybody else didn't want him to go up there and they would beat him up if he tried. So he quit trying. Then another monkey was substituted and the same behavior occurred. And when the second monkey tried to go up there, the first monkey participated in the beating of the second new monkey. Then a third monkey was changed, and a fourth, and a fifth, till all of a sudden you had 5 monkeys that never received a cold shower, but continued to beat up any monkey who climbed the ladder. Really? What would happen, now I ask you, if you placed any of these subjects among you? I assume you get the point at this point. And if you don't, you're about to. What would happen if you placed any of these subjects to the right there at the top of the ladder for discussion in a gospel doctrine class? Now, mind you, all of the people in the class have been conditioned by correlation and by leaders, up to and including general authorities, telling them, don't go after the mysteries, don't talk about this, don't talk about that, till all of them comply. And so you talk about, you want to talk about, was the Nauvoo temple finished? Well, of course it was. Brigham Young was doing ordinances up there. And you say, wait a second, doesn't look like it was finished. any of these. How about why did Joseph Smith have multiple wives? Let's see, there's one in here that would really be, were men of African descent denied the priesthood by revelation? Oh, you'll have a whole discussion about that. People will get angry about that one. Should we seek after the second comforter? They'll gang up on you on that one like crazy. These are our bananas at the top of our ladder. And the true blue Mormons of the church have been conditioned by the cold water sprayed on them by their leaders to stay away from these kinds of subjects that they don't even ask. Every time a member goes up the ladder, the brethren, through correlation, soak the rest of the members with cold water until finally, generation after generation, nobody asks anymore. They just gang up on anybody who goes up that ladder. All right, we're at the end of another part of this episode. I appreciate your being here. Let me quickly here say goodbye until the next episode, or rather the next part of this episode, and we will continue. Thank you for being here.
15 miles to Provo, and I'm standing in the desert sun, trying to hitch a ride. Not a sign of